Hello, my name is Silvester Carl Henderson, Professor Henderson, and I am so excited to introduce to our media world Dr. Jonathan Locust. As you know, I am CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated, and I had a chance to recently meet Dr. Locust, and we're grateful that he had an opportunity to come in on our show this morning. Good morning, Dr. Locust.
How's it going?
I'm doing good, my man.
Wonderful,
You know,
wonderful.
I wondered, Dr. Locust, if you would introduce yourself to our media world here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my name is Dr. Jonathan Locust. I am originally from Cleveland, Ohio, so from the Cleveland area. Shortly after I graduated from high school, I ended up doing undergraduate, get my bachelor's degree from the University of Cincinnati. Afterwards, ended up selling health and life insurance for kind of a short period of time.
Okay.
After that, ended up pursuing, and I actually did that. I'll tell you, I actually did that. My father, even still to this day, is a pastor. And I started to see then as members in our church will pass on and move on, their families didn't have a lot of money to then be able to take care of their loved ones financially. So seeing that as a kid, what kind of was a motivator for that, which was great. And then ended up deciding to pursue a master's in education. Ended up becoming a director of diversity, doing some Title IX stuff, pursued the Ph.D., went on to become a chief diversity officer, a vice president, started my own business, and that kind of what brings us to this point now. So that's kind of a overview of kind of how I got to from A to B.
Wow. You know what? You just said mentioned a great word to me when you told me that your dad is a pastor, because I'm a great man of faith and I believe in God totally. That's one of the
Mhm.
principles that a lot of people in higher education leave out. So I believe in God and I believe everything is the mission of God, and you can't do anything, especially for people of color, without God. So thank you for sharing that. Tell me something about your work and obligation as an associate professor of communication studies, I believe, at Winona State University.
Yes,
You get
yes.
a chance to work with both undergraduate and graduate students and what have you.
So in that particular program, that's a graduate program. So for that graduate program, it's communication studies, but it is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for that particular program, it's like as I mentioned, it's a graduate program, and I'm working with graduate students. Some of the work, and it's interesting because we literally just submitted a IRB proposal to then study like a DEI curriculum embedded in communication studies. So prior to, I have been working at Winona State as their Chief Diversity Officer, Associate Vice President of Equity and Inclusion and Inclusive Excellence. I took on the faculty teaching position while at the university and continued on, even though I've transitioned out of my role as Chief Diversity Officer. But some of the work that we're doing is really focusing on the relationship between communications, DEI, public relations, and even for the course, what we talked about was we talked about minstrel shows and how minstrel shows were, because now that's a few generations removed. Some of the students didn't know what minstrel shows were, but we one of the works we had to listen to a interview by Spike Lee talk about Bamboozle, his movie, and to be able to see then even like Jim Crow was originally a minstrel show character, right? So all these different aspects of those different connections that to be able to talk about, and how do these things that were embedded in media still affect us and impact us to this day. And for these communications and media practitioners to be aware of that, to be looking for that, and to be investigating that to make sure we don't repeat it.
Wow. You know what? You mentioned, as you know, I am a senior, and to me, you look like a wonderful young brother. And so
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Have the thing. You seem like such a nice fella. Um, you know, there is through all of my almost 5 decades in higher education, I've noticed that the mission of institutions and the words have changed. Now the big issue is everybody is focusing on equity, but you know, in the media now, there's a lot of debate between whether institutions should focus on equality or equity. Many of the Democrats believe equity, and many of the Republicans believe it should be equality. And so I kind of just came up when you were telling me about that, because I understand both. I understand that equality says if we get you to the fence, it's not our responsibility to make sure you can see over the fence. But equity says you get to the fence. If the person is short, you give them a stool so they can stand up and be able to look over the fence, just like the tall. I mean, that's just kind of like an old man scenario of what it is. Mm-hmm. And so I would be curious to kind of hear your definitions of equality versus equity. Because, I mean, everybody has, this is a topic that is going to be evolving and evolving, even when I retire, which is going to be soon. But it's going to be in the hearts of administrators, and it's the current theme that travels through the core of institutions right now. So could you elaborate on that a little bit for me, please?
Yeah. So it's, you know, it's interesting. For one, I appreciate the question. So I guess kind of looking at it from equality and equity, which I do understand both, and I kind of understand why the kind of political arguments that people make for either or. But the reason I can even give like a real life scenario of why equity becomes really, really important. So when you really start to look at like really kind of stabilizing the playing field for the most part, if you're able to then basically understand, okay, what are, so I'll give a perfect example. One of the things that when I was in the CDO role at Winona State, one of the things that was brought to our attention was that international students, and this was told by the person who oversees international, that they believe that international students was actually being sent, getting sent to collection more often than other students. Okay, so as we then investigated that, what we found was that there was international students as well as Black and Hispanic students being sent to collections at a higher rate than other students, right? So as we then started to look at those particular populations, and then in relationship to graduation, all of these ways and so forth, then one of the things that we did was we kind of adjusted the policy, because what was happening was if they didn't hit a certain minimum, so if they had a certain amount on their bill, they would automatically be sent to collection. So if we raised that just a little bit more, that would have then prevented certain people from being sent to collections, or groups from being sent to collections. Well, once we implemented that change, of course, not only was international students, Black students, and Hispanic Latino students impacted, but guess who else? Poor white students, or white students of a social economic class. And that's when you do focus on those particular populations, it then raises the boat, or raises for all of them, which everybody then becomes impacted by that. So even by trying to focus on this particular population, we weren't focusing on white students, but because we were able to fix that particular thing that was mainly impacting students of color and international students, it then positively impacted white students as well.
Wow. Okay. So you feel that equity is a viable mission for institutions. And tell me, I know you just started a new company called the Locust Group. How does the Locust Group support the principle of equity, and describe your work and academic mission or community mission with your new company, the Locust Group.
Yeah, so it's I actually I'll even kind of I'll say this pretty quickly. So one of the reasons that I actually ended up like starting the Locust Group was and I've had it open now for probably for the last 4 to 5 years, and it had been a goal of mine to then be able to eventually be able to transition out. But the last institution I worked at, that Winona State, prior to that, I was essentially applying for a position that that I had the qualifications for, but I didn't even get interviewed for it. And because of that, I was heartbroken from being there at the institution for that long, spending time, hours, and I actually wanted to quit. But because we just had a child, just because we had just bought a house, I couldn't quit. But that weekend I went and started my LLC. It was like, I'm never going to be in this kind of position situation again. So that was kind of the impetus that I started, prior to going to Minnesota. And one of the things that we focus on is research and predictive analytics. So as we're looking to see, okay, how do we support, and I can give a few different examples, how we support different types of institutions, but we do that by either doing specialized user experience research. We do that by being able to work with campuses to see what their campus climate survey data means and how do we actually turn that into action items. And then also to being able to look at data from a number of different sources, a number of different surveys, to then look and say, what are the themes that are arising in this work? And this is how we more strategically move forward. So a lot of it is really doing data research. Like for one of the projects we did with the Cuyahoga Valley National Parks is why Black people don't go to the parks. And we were better really able to understand some of the reasons and rationales as to that were preventers of Black people and Black visitorship at the parks, and to be able to investigate that and to be able to then work with the parks to then be able to make the place more inclusive. So a number of different research, the data, the analytics, and being able to find what individuals, people or groups are thinking in order to move ways that are not only more equitable, but are more research driven.
So it sounds like your company is kind of like a community institution or data researcher. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah. So the one thing that
about you find areas of improvement that are needed, and you come up with the data to support it, and then you can share with organizations to help them strategize and rechange and to be more inclusive in changing its culture.
Yes, and that's 100% correct. And then once, depending on, I guess, how sophisticated institutions want to go, what are the variables that are predicting retention and persistence and so forth. And I can give a few different examples of some of the how we look at equity from a perspective of jury outcome predictions and ways in which we've been able to do that, and how that works have also impacted the work we do in higher education as well. So we can really get down to different levels of multivariate analysis. When we're doing our legal cases, it's the minimum of 10 variables that we're interacting to look for a certain outcome.
Wow. Well, listen, Dr. Locust, I am so enthralled by this interview and conversation. Once again, thank you. I want to ask you, who influenced you to become a professor and business owner?
Yes, it was one of my academic as well as business mentors. One of my first, really my second internship that I had my sophomore year in college. I had a market research internship by the guy under the name of Dr. McKnight. And for that particular internship, we were looking at the impact of particular words on political campaigns. And we went through the analysis, and from being a first generation college student, I was just completely surprised that it takes one word can impact something so great. So as I later found out that Dr. McKnight, who also had a business predicting jury outcomes, that was his dissertation research. So we stayed in contact, to the point to over the years from my sophomore year to as I got my master's, we really stayed connected where he was on my thesis committee. He was also on my dissertation committee. And after staying in contact and him knowing some of the work I was doing with DEI, it was him who really started introducing me into some of the legal work that he was doing and kind of not only showing me how to get analysis, but how then as we were talking about it, I would bring up certain inequities that would exist. And then we would come up with ways to test those inequities and we would test them out. And then that's when I really saw that there's an opportunity with research and data and predictive analysis because the researcher, a lot of times, I know I didn't necessarily think about it, but the person who's telling the story, that researcher, they have a particular perspective, which they're seeing that particular problem, instance, issue, experiment at a particular level. So I think it's extremely important for people of color, Black and brown people to really be pursuing research because those particular experiences that you had as an individual can greatly impact to give a perspective on a particular problem that's not necessarily being utilized at this particular time. So it was really him who introduced me to it. And from there, I kind of just started and I kind of continued on kind of selling research.
Wow. Tell me, thank you for that. Kind of describe how has your research and some of your findings helped to improve learning for students from your company? In other words, what can your company do or what has it done from a research perspective that will help the learning outcome for students of color?
Absolutely. So a few different things, especially if you're looking at it from a few different ways. So whenever we are doing like our legal research where we sign NDAs to the point where we cannot tell like exact law firm we're working for, but we can talk about the particular instances. Then they either help us get more business or give scenarios. So one way is we're able to then talk about how how invisible factors of discrimination and racism impact places that are not even currently being measured. So I'll give you kind of a particular example. One of the ways that certain companies will engage us to then see if to maybe understand how much a case is worth or if they think a case value is too low. So one example, there was a Black kid who was hit by a car. The law firm thought the case value was too low. Well, as we ended up looking, we also thought it was too low as well. So one of the things that we did was we were able to then pretty much recreate that case, but substitute the Black kid being hit for other particular races to then see how that then would impact the case value. Well, I can tell you once we changed the name to one that sounded more Asian, the case value tripled. The case value, and just from there, we were then able to then see the attributes of the particular cases that were impacting the case value, and then have those attributes included into the case for the Black kid, so that family gets the maximum case value for what it's actually worth. So from that kind of scenario, we're then able to then not only help in the legal firm, because a lot of times, like, the family never sees us, but to know that I can be in the behind the scenes doing stuff to impact that family. But then we're also able to talk about that in relationship to in higher education about how these factors of discrimination or these embedded things in our mind leads to families, for example, from different groups getting less money than other groups just because of these particular biases. So one of them is to be able to shed light and to put a spotlight on where kind of these individual things of racism exist, and then encourage people of color to then investigate those other ones. Like, I've investigated this, there's other ones out there, and we need people, and we know racism is a system. So we need people at the bottom level making sure certain components that are producing and reproducing that system cease to exist. So that's kind of my attribute of being able to talk about different ways in which we utilize our research and the different ways racism and discrimination is embedded into that, and then encouraging people to then go and research that for themselves.
So your company really focuses a lot again on breaking down organizational and institutional barriers
Absolutely.
that are racist in nature. Some are intentional. Some are probably racially charged without even knowing, because racism is based so much on how we grow up, how we think, what are your perspectives of this particular culture. I recall years ago when I was an associate professor at the University of California, where I was at for 19, close to 20 years. And I had left my office going to class. I had this big choir I was teaching, well-known group. I would get to the campus on Friday evenings at about 5 o'clock. I was leaving my office and I was going down the hallway, and I guess the janitor in the building, I was in Barrows Hall, there was some trash on the floor. And there was this Caucasian man coming from the other side of Barrows Hall. I didn't know him. And there was some trash on the floor. And he said to me, he said, "Well, there's some trash on the floor. Don't you think you should pick it up?" And I said, "Oh," I said, "maybe I'll do that when I get through teaching my class." Then he said, I said, "I tell you, my man, I'll come back and get it when I get through teaching my class." He said, "Oh, I am so," he just automatically assumed, because I was a man, that the same way that I was someone less than, not understanding even though the janitor may pick up the trash, they still have value as well.
Right.
He just made an assumption. No more like a guy told me, an older white guy told me at the gym. These were in my earlier years. Someone was saying, "That's a famous professor over there." And this older white guy had the hardest time accepting that. He actually told me. He came to me and said, "I want to know, are you a college professor?" I didn't say anything. He said, "Because America got to get back to some values. I know ain't no nigger, no college professor."
Oh, no.
And you know what? I had a couple of ways I could respond.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I did was I recognized that it was an old Caucasian fella who was ignorant.
Yep.
So I just said, "Sir, you're right." I said, "You know what? I work as the head of the maintenance department." And he said, "You know what? That is so nice. I want to help you and Mama get your first home." Now, I own tons of property. But I say that to say that I remember, I've had so many experiences as a 63-year-old man, because even though right now in my life is relatively peaceful, there have been many, many hurdles over over 4 decades of involvement in higher education. So I'm always enthralled to meet young, smart brothers such as yourself who are using their wisdom to beat the odds. So I want to say I'm proud of you and congratulate you on that, my man.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So I want to ask you, as we continue, just a couple of more questions. What do you think has been one of your most significant research accomplishments?
Yeah. So I would say, as far as my most significant, I would have to say my dissertation. And the reason I say my dissertation is because for me at that moment, it was me not only breaking like educational gaps that have been like throughout my family, but I'll just share like one of the things that my research studied on is what is the best type of institution for a Black student to get an education. And when I say best was in terms of having the greatest chances of graduating, as well as getting the largest 20-year return on investment on that education. And what we found was HBCUs and institutions with African American population a student population 16% or below. And what we found was that like that 16% is like that cut score where institutions are like, okay, it's kind of that's a good amount of them. We don't, and stop as kind of focusing as much. But that right there, that research that I did, not only to get my PhD, but to also be able to then share it in a way and share it with particular institutions that have actually made adjustments on how they're teaching. Because I can see, I get notifications of when some of the articles and stuff are downloaded. You know how you'll get somebody downloaded, you'll get a and to be able to see that I'm getting active downloads on that. People are looking at it, it's having an impact. And sometimes I'll go in. So to be able, I guess that is very exciting for me. And I feel like that's a huge accomplishment to know that something I worked extremely hard for to get my PhD, like the University of Toledo was a 2.5-hour drive from Cleveland. So, I mean, I was on the road for 5 hours to get an education. I mean, just all these different things that I went through to then be able to get the degree, and then people are still being able to have a residual, my research having a residual impact, even though I'm no longer in my doctoral program, feels phenomenal. So that's probably one of my biggest kind of research accomplishments, I would say.
One of the things I want to continue to say is that I'm proud of you and congratulations.
Thank you.
So proud of you, man. That's great. What challenges have you faced as a man of color just in the college system? Now, you mentioned earlier that you had applied. I'm gonna let you talk about your experience because mine is too enormous. Where you dedicated, because this is the story for many African American males. They're hired from systems. Everybody tell you, get an education, get your job, work for the system, help make a difference. You get in and you work yourself, you devote all these free hours, and then when it's an opportunity for you to advance, they never give you the position. That's a common story. Someone told me ago that when you look at your typical African American male, if they're hired as a professor, whether it's an associate faculty or tenure track faculty, generally 90 to 95%, the percentage is that high. Follow them down 30 years later, they're still in the same position.
Yep.
Because they never get an opportunity to advance because the system locks them out. And then what they do is they say there's no racism. They say, oh, we don't have no racism. We have an equity document. We have, we've gone through and we've evaluated our hiring practices. And I've always said all of that is just a smokescreen. Because the reality is that if you need to hire more people of color, and how do you do that? Stop hiring so many white folk. Simple as that.
Yeah.
You don't need a PhD to figure out if you want to hire more people of color, stop hiring so many white folk. Simple as that.
You got it.
Recommend it to the president, and then they say, and the person is, you got everybody in that area white, don't hire them. Simple as that. They're going to put it on the law. They got to do with the laws.
Mm-hmm.
People are not hired in positions because of applications. People are hired in positions of authority because of networking and a whole bunch of crooked stuff in the back door.
Right. You're right.
That's the bottom line. But nobody's going to admit that. They're going to give you a big smoke screen and something that sounds nice to the community. Then they're going to use state dollars to go and come up with this elaborate committee to make people think, oh, we need to go back and research this and change our practice. But in reality, the reality is real clear that as we're moving through, still no people of color have been hired.
Yeah.
So what are some of the additional challenges that you face, and how have you dealt with some of those challenges in addition to starting your wonderful business?
Yeah, so I would say like the one challenge that I had that I ended up sharing with the one institution that wouldn't hire me, that was pretty much a kind of a wake up call for me to really know that I have to be extremely, I just can't be reliant on one particular aspect. So that was like the major, I would say one of like the major lessons. But and two, even when with just navigating higher education, A lot of times, a lot of things you say sometimes are either second guessed, or they may not automatically think that it's coming from you, or it's your idea, or I've had since I've one of the things that I've kind of dealt with continuously is since I've typically been the the youngest administrator around the table, and a lot of times, not all the time, because I would know in the state it was not like that, but at times the only person of color, I would get the not only the racism thing, but also the age thing, or either we've seen that before, and so those have been like some of the challenges. But then for me, like being able to provide data, being able to provide research as to why certain things are happening and going that way, then you start to develop a reputation. That is just certain things that that reputation then becomes kind of impenetrable to a way where certain things just won't impact anymore. And I'll just kind of just share really briefly. Like, I know at Winona State, I felt this way. The president and the cabinet were very, very supportive of everything I did. So I want to like very, very supportive. But one of the things I started doing was I started bringing a black barber to campus because students were having to travel over an hour and a half in order to be able to get a haircut. And I was having to go to get the beard trim, to get the beard fresh. So we start bringing a barber to campus essentially every few weeks. The students, you had to sign up in our office. So we had an opportunity to meet a number of different black and brown students who hadn't come to the office before, who hadn't engaged. I kind of made a presentation to the football team and all of these different things. Well, after that, these things started to then happen. Community members started to then call me to ask if they can come on campus to then get their haircut. So the need was there. We're after kind of not only talking with the barber, connecting with the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the mayor, Uncle Gil's Barbershop, the first black barbershop, opened up in downtown Winona. And then as people started to then see the impact of equity as well as economic development, the community started to look at our work a little bit differently than they had in the past. So being able to then, reputation became very, very much more important, because as I started to then bring more ideas to the institution, more ideas to the community, they were accepted a lot more, because we can point and say, okay, because of this, there's a new business, a new black business in this area that was non-existent in the middle of COVID, that wasn't there before.
What a wonderful student support service you created for not only the students, but it's like you use a creative idea of doing something that no one thinks about. Just making it so that people can get their hair cut and have personal hygiene more effectively and not have to go broke to do that. But at the same token, you were able to support the barber who had turned around and opened up his own business and actually supported the concept of what the college does. You know, tell me a little bit about your work with protected classes in respect to, I don't want to say just the gender movement, the gender and the cultural movement.
Yeah, well, so part of it is I can say that I've relocated to Florida. So I've been in Florida for the last maybe 5 weeks now. And I came here for a few different reasons. Firstly, because of family. When we were in Wisconsin and Minnesota, our family was very, very far away. We didn't see them. And so being closer to family was one. Weather was two. I didn't want to have to shovel any more snow. So weather was number two. And then as we looked at a number of different things, as I was, of course, working on my own, so could work anywhere, where my wife could do the same. We looked and we really started to see, okay, right now, where can we go where we can be of impact? Where our family, I have an 8-year-old son and I have a 2.5 old daughter, where they can actually see us fighting for things that we believe in, that we can demonstrate and we can show. So when we came to Florida, that was one of the reasons that we actually came, because we thought that this was some place that we can actually be of service and to be able to help. So that was really one of the aspects of why we actually came here, because I thought not only with the work that I'm researching, things that we doing, involved with the community, being able to connect, and being able to then be involved on a political scale are ways we then start to then impact. So kind of even personally, just moving our family to here, to the place where we want to smoke. We want our kids to see us fighting for things that we believe in. So that's kind of been kind of some of the ways in which we've chose to kind of be impact, as you said, like the cultural movement.
Okay, very good. You know what? It is so nice to talk with you, because you are a very wholesome young fella. There's a very large struggle. I'm a traditionalist, but I'm also liberal in my thinking, but I'm real traditional in my thinking. And your persona matches my belief of what African-American males should achieve to become.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Wow, thank you.
You're an astute young fella, and that's good. California preaches a different philosophy. In California, the family, there's a big struggle debate in California and in liberal states that, they're still kind of deciding what is the family, and I'm not going to get into that whole conversation, because that's a whole big conversation. But it's really nice to talk to a young fella who is in a conservative state, and he feels positive being in that conservative state. I like that a lot. I do. Please tell me what are some of your, Dr. Locust, what are some of your future goals, future projects, and innovations?
Oh, yeah.
Then share your final thoughts before we wrap up our interview.
I would say future goals and aspirations is, for one, as the Locust Group really starts to really becomes to move forward and be innovative with the type of market and predictive analysis that it's doing. Our goal is to start either working with or partnering with startups to then be able to do certain type of research for them, but there may even be an avenue where certain aspects of that research they want on a continuous basis, where then we can do maybe an equity exchange for some of our research to become a part of that team more long term. So the goal would be I really do think there's an opportunity in building generational wealth, and to do that by either working with companies and organizations that are looking to buy and sell. So for as a research company to be kind of on the proximity of that, to be able to see how we can do work is something that's helpful. And then I would say, as far as what I'm looking to do, and as a final word, is for me is to be able to then understand more the intersections of diversity and consciousness. And when I say that as far as and I use my father, who was a Pentecostal bishop, as kind of a litmus test. But because he would sometimes, when I'll talk to him, he may say, you didn't want to got too much education. But I say that as I've worked and learned with so many different people, I've learned different aspects of how they have approached achieving certain levels of consciousness that I think could be helpful for a lot of different groups that would not be an impedance on a particular religion. So I think that type of kind of research is needed as we see DEI and things being attacked. I think one way to do it is to then kind of raise the vibration of how it's being talked about. And if we're talking about it in relationship to consciousness, that then puts it on a different field, because you're just looking at it from different perspectives. So that's something that I am looking to continue on to do, as far as kind of combining some of the spiritual aspects of DEI, and how I think that could really be able to push things forward and to be able to just make people, regardless of where you are, feel more connected.
There is an organization. I remember about a year ago seeing some sort of conference that dealt with spirituality and higher education. And I think it was overseas someplace. But I think there is working in African American religious music so profoundly and higher education has led me to believe that one must, especially African Americans, one must have a belief in God, or should have, from my perspective, a belief in God, because it is the beauty of God and the belief in God that helps us to deal with all the disappointments, because you're able to focus it more effectively and give a reason for it, and understand that in your faith, you can face anything. You can face disappointment. You can face pain. You can be grateful. You have someone and a value that allows you to communicate effectively. I want to communicate this point to you, that I honestly, in my heart, I've interviewed a lot of people, but you are such a pleasant young man. I just admire you. Share this old man's vision to your family. You tell your Pentecostal father he did a good job of rearing you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really do. I really do humbly appreciate that, and I'll certainly pass that. I certainly will pass that on. But really, thank you for those words. I really do appreciate it.
You are a wonderful person. I would love to see how faith, humanity, inspiration, that is really God, how that is going to continue to develop your life, because you use all those wonderful things you've learned about research. But the very foundation of who you are as a man is, I can tell, is a man of great ethics, honesty, and I look forward to watching your career develop. I may be old and in a wheelchair at that point, but I'm going to remember Dr. Jonathan Locust. And you share a hello to your beautiful family for me. And I want to thank you on behalf of Professor for Life Incorporated for allowing me to have the opportunity and space to speak with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love the work. That you're doing. The content that you're producing is amazing. So thank you for even allowing me to even come on and have a conversation with you.
You're so welcome, and be blessed and have a wonderful day, sir.
Absolutely.
God bless you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.